One last story for today, my very fine friends. I called this segment America's Marxist Insurrection Burns Churches. And the reason I want to connect some dots, we've been talking about Antifa, however you want to say it, the fascist organization that tried to delude Americans by naming themselves the anti-fascists. That's what Antifa is. It's short for anti-fascist. They're a fascist organization. And we had a brilliant guest on this show weeks ago talking about the roots of Antifa. It's actually a very old organization, communist, very anti-American organization. And they have locked arms with the Black Lives Matter movement in America. And they are part of this ongoing destruction of our cities, burning our cities, graffiti everywhere, smashing store windows, stealing things, just literally destroying America from the inside. That's what is happening. An interesting thing, though, I wanted to mention, and this has to do with the topic of this, of this segment is, if you still are duped into thinking that the entire Black Lives Matter protest and the Antifa protest around this country is really all tied to the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis at the hands of the police in Minneapolis, then I need to disabuse you of that thought. Antifa, Black Lives Matter, destruction of American cities has nothing whatsoever to do with Black lives, nothing to do with racial justice, nothing to do with George Floyd. It is a Marxist undermining attack on America using the excuse of the George Floyd very tragic death in Minneapolis to launch an attack on America. One element of that is really worth considering is why. Say you were a real, genuine, you're a protester who just wants to get on, get out there in the world and do your protest because you're upset about George Floyd. Why is it that you would, in the course of these protests, burn down churches? Why? How is burning down a church tied to the Minneapolis Police Department? And obviously it's not. And I want to tell you how frequent this has been in the course of these protests in America, this Antifa and Black Lives Matter protests, burning or destroying religious statues in New York, Massachusetts, Florida, California, Missouri, burning churches, Queen of Peace Catholic Church in Ocala, Florida, the church, I believe it's Episcopal Church right across from the White House, churches and religious statues burned. Why? If you are going to try to legitimize what the left and the Democrats are saying is the reason for these protests, there should be some logic there. Why would you, in protesting the Minneapolis Police Department, destroy Christian statues in cities around the country? Why? Why would you burn churches in cities around the country? And the answer is because these marches, these protests have nothing to do with George Floyd or Black lives or police brutality. They are Marxist in nature. The Marxist element in this country that has been in this country for decades. The Communist Party coming here in the 1920s, they've been cultivating American society to embrace communist ideas, and you can just don't let some ninny on the left try to get you to nitpick and say, well, you can't say communist because it's really only Marxist, and Marxist is really not that, it's only socialist. All those isms live in the same ugly, tyrannical corner. Communist, Marxist, socialism, all these groups, they are just simply tyrannical power seekers who wish to destroy the United States of America. And the answer to the question of why those groups are destroying churches is because Marxists, socialists, communists, leftists hate religion. They hate religion. The very founder of Marxism, Marx himself, described religion as he was the father of communism, which has been a barbaric political system in this world, responsible for the deaths of over 100 million people in the 20th century. That's what this Marxist, the father of communism, Karl Marx, he talked about religion as the soul of soulless conditions, the opium of the people. People who rise to power as communists, socialists, Marxists, always destroy churches, always outlaw religion, always arrest priests and pastors. They are disappeared. They just never show up again. Why you have the Chinese Communist government currently today in the 2020, the Communist government of China is in the middle of rounding up Christians and forcing them in their homes to get rid of all Christian symbols, whatever they would have, a Virgin Mary statue, a cross, whatever religious symbols they have. This is an ongoing effort. The Chinese Communist government forcing its Christian citizens to throw away, to get rid of, to trash all symbols of Christianity, and instead put a picture up of the leader of the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping, or other symbols of communism. Again, you have to connect those dots. The reason communists, Marxists, socialists, the reason these people hate religion is because they are tyrannical and they want to control the thoughts and beliefs of the people. They want to tell you what to think about everything. They want to be the one entity you turn to, the all-powerful God in your life. In the communist movement, the communist mindset is the Communist Party, the communist government. And when people have faith in something else, something bigger, something to Christians around the world, more real, more meaningful, when people have faith in that, they're not so easily controllable and manipulable. It is why, since in every time in this world, since communists, socialists, Marxists took control of any country, of any people, they go after the churches. And now you come back to the United States of America and ask yourself, what does this Marxist uprising in this country, why are they destroying Christian churches and statues and symbols of Christianity? Why? And the answer, I already told you. The answer is what I just said. Because these people are Marxists. Because their ultimate goal is not to have an America with a robust freedom of religion and a robust set of rights that we all recognize emanating from our Bill of Rights and the Constitution. It's because Marxists are about destroying freedom, destroying your rights. And so the idea of beginning the destruction of churches is not just that the Marxists are on the path of destroying churches and burning churches and tearing down statues and religious symbols. The entire left in this country, the leftists in this country who now control what used to be a radical left, communist, Marxist, socialist movement is now mainstream Democrat Party. It is why leftists in this country, Democrats in this country, are utterly intolerant of freedom of religion. It's why you see more and more effort of groups in this country to shut down religious freedom, to argue that people's religious freedom should be narrowly circumscribed to where they attend church on Sunday or what they say in the privacy of their own homes. The antagonism leftists feel against religion stems from the reality that leftists' mission, their political mission, is to be tyrannical and to lead and dictate to every single person everything you think. And religion gets in their way because people form their values based on religion, and the communists can't do anything about that. So recognize it matters that the Marxist movement in this country is destroying churches. There's a great piece about that on our website, americacanwetalk.org. If you go to our website, americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage, under shows, drop down list of links, I link to this article making these very points. And I want to make a couple other points that relate to this. Once you grasp this reality, once you grasp the truth that the movement we are seeing destroying our cities in this country, destroying cities, attacking cities, people are just, governors and mayors just surrendering to this Marxist uprising. This is an insurrection against America. It's not legitimate political protest. It is an actual insurrection against America. The sooner we see it as that, label it as that, and then treat it as an insurrection, the safer America will be, and the sooner we will be past this, we will be able to squelch this movement in this country, this astonishing actual insurrection against America. So when Donald Trump, President Trump, sends in troops to Portland and says, you're gonna stop, this is not out of line for the president. He actually has a duty to put down insurrections. We have to get past, in this country, we have to get past this delusion the left is trying to foist on us. So we think that the Republicans have their view, the Democrats have their view, and we have these protesters, and they're somehow in the ballpark of mainstream America. They just happen to be Democrats. They just happen to be behind Black Lives Matter, and they happen to be Antifa people, but they're still in the American playing field. They're not. They are trying to overthrow America. And I know that people listen to things like I'm saying, and they go, oh my gosh, you've lost your mind. This is hyperbole, this is exaggeration, this is just a movement, this is just opposition to police brutality, it's just opposition to the way that George Floyd was treated. No, my friends, it's not. It is not. We are watching the beginning of an insurrection, the overthrowing of America. It is why you have people more and more concerned, why you ought to be asking yourselves, why do all these Democrat mayors permit the destruction of their cities, the destruction of the businesses that their own citizens own? Why do they permit the overrunning of businesses and cities, allow them to be destroyed, burned, smashed, and dissolved, and they say nothing? Why? You have to understand, number one, Democrats own Antifa. Democrats own the Marxist movement in this country. Democrats own the Black Lives Matter Marxist movement. It must be hung around their necks in this election cycle because they will not renounce it. They will not stop it. And then the second point, so Trump is right to send in troops. The second point I wanted to get at is it's really important to understand that not just does President Trump have the authority to stop these things, he actually has the obligation to stop these things. The power of the federal government, the duty of the president is to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That is the president's job, to defend the Constitution, which means the constitutional structure of our country, the freedom of our country. It is the duty of the president to defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. And I say that because it's very hard for many people to actually look at and watch what the left is doing and see it in any other terms other than that, well, this is just a protest. This is just because of George Floyd. This is because it's an election year and the left is getting their voters stirred up. We will lose our country if we don't get a handle on what is happening in the streets of America. And to that end, we are allowed, in fact, we are required, President Trump and the people, and his advisors, the office of the president is obligated to defend America, defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We have to begin characterizing Antifa and the Black Lives Matter Marxist movement as actual terror organizations, as actual domestic enemies, and treat them that way. Treat them as domestic enemies. Treat them as people involved in movements that would otherwise overthrow our constitutional order, otherwise overthrow our country if they are not put down. And I want to tell you that this topic came up because there was a piece written by sadly, one of the many people who remained in the U.S. military, survived the purging of the high ranks of the U.S. military under President Obama, who, after 8 years, had driven out many genuine patriots and kept the leftists inside the leadership in the military, not 100%, but left inside the leadership of the military, people who really were not, he left inside the ones that he could work with, that would be more amenable to what the radical changes he was trying to bring to this country. And Obama removed from the military high-ranking officials in the military who were more aware of the idea of America, the duty of the military in America to support the founding of America. So There was an article on June 2nd in the Atlantic. We talked about the Atlantic before. Radically leftist, anti-American, poses as a really intellectual source because they write long articles and they have a very self-important tone and very condescending, intellectually superior tone. But the Atlantic is a radical leftist rag, and they had an article in which the chairman, this is June 2nd of 2020, an article by former chairman of the Joint Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, who was writing about the turmoil in our country, which we're still enduring, but he wrote about the turmoil in our country, saying, "Our fellow citizens are not the enemy and must never become so." That is wrong. That is incorrect. When people who possess American citizenship and have a legal right to be here, but are engaged in the Marxist overthrow, the attempted Marxist overthrow of our government, the attempted effort to urge more and more Americans to get behind the Antifa movement, get behind the Black Lives Matter movement, and they are destroying property. They are building their political credibility. They are building their political strength. I'm not saying Antifa and Black Lives Matter could overthrow America tomorrow. Of course not. We have enough people in America who still love this country and will defend it. But what you have is a growing insurrection inside our borders, a growing insurrection of people who are citizens and are committed to their agenda of the Marxist overthrow of America. The fact that they can't get there tomorrow or next month does not mean that we should simply tolerate it. We have to be able to define them, to recognize they are domestic enemies. And so this guy went on to write about Mike Mullen again. He is the former chairman of the Joint Staff. Admiral Mike Mullen wrote that our own fellow citizens cannot be the enemy. And so there's a great piece that was written in response to that. And again, it's up on our website. You can read it at americacanwetalk.org. It's a response to that argument that's saying, no, actually, an inconvenient fact, Admiral Mike Mullen, but our Constitution actually contemplates the existence of domestic enemies. We talked about that, and America talked about that even before we had the whole country founded and put together, that in order to have a country, so in 1775, this was written before the Declaration was even signed, this idea, if you're going to be a country, you have to recognize you have the obligation, the sovereign obligation, to protect that country against enemies, foreign and domestic. You have to protect the country, and it is the duty and not only the right of the president, but the duty of the president, and law in this country backs the president with the idea it is his job to put down insurrections in this country. We need to be, I'm not saying, I know that what I'm saying may sound really radical to you. I'm not saying that we need to have the military brought out in every city in America and squelching all these protests. I'm not saying we're there yet, but we at least have to cross the intellectual line that says we must admit to ourselves that some of this protest, some of this conduct, not even protest, riots, murder, property destruction, the pure mayhem and mob mentality in this country is part of the Marxist effort to overthrow this country. It is a Marxist movement, and right now it's small, can't win the day tomorrow or in the next month, but we can begin to recognize intellectually we have to define it as an enemy, a domestic enemy, and that we have authority in this country to fight back against domestic enemies. We don't have to wait until the entire country is burning. We don't have to wait until they're holding power till they begin to negotiate. Can we, is it possible we can have our rights back again? Can we have America again? Can we have our freedoms again? We can begin to recognize because they are domestic terrorists, they have to be treated that way. Antifa, the Marxist Black Lives Matter movement must be treated as domestic terrorists and actually treated as enemies within, domestic enemies whom the president has responsibility and duty to the American people to shut them down. I am not specifically advocating for immediate use of military force anywhere, but I am making the argument that we need to begin to recognize, of course, the president has not only the right, but the duty to put down domestic insurrection in this country because we know intellectually what's behind it. Intellectually what's behind Antifa. It's a communist organization back from Germany in the 1940s. It has existed since then, and it is a communist, anti-American movement. We have to be able to define communism as anti-American again. We have to stop acting like we can't really say that communism is anti-American. Of course it is. We have to define these organizations who, by their own documents, by their own words, are acknowledging they are committed to the Marxist movement. They are domestic enemies, and President Trump and future presidents need to treat them as such.